you want it to be good enough to release to your customers. You want it to help, and you don't want to release garbage content out there by any stretch. But then you also don't want to spend 3 to 4 months on something to release episode one, to have your cover art defined, and then once you release it, gets 3 downloads, and then the CEO's breathing down your neck saying, "Hey, we got to shut this thing off. You guys have been working on it for 6 months. Doesn't make any sense."
Introducing Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we capture stories from industry experts and podcasters. Listen in and uncover what it takes to launch, run, and grow a successful B2B podcast. Check out and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Let's jump in.
Hey, I'm Tristan. I'm the co-founder of Motion and your host for this episode of Recorded Content. The show is brought to you by my company, Motion. We are a done-for-you podcast agency for small, scrappy B2B tech marketers. I believe podcasts are so much more than a single audio file. But most marketers still view podcasts as something you just put on Apple Podcasts, or it's something you find on Spotify. With a podcast, especially a video podcast, you can build content around what your ideal customers care about, and then distribute in audio, video, and written formats. In fact, your company's podcast can power your entire content marketing strategy. And recently, I appeared on the Unmissed podcast to talk about how this can work for your company. Here's the conversation.
Anyone who want to learn more about podcasting, welcome, because today we have an interesting topic, how your podcast can grow your business and how to unite with content marketing strategy. I'm so excited to discuss this topic with Tristan Pelligrino. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, we chatted a little bit about Wednesday, about each day in our lives. So yeah, I enjoy the process. Okay, Tristan, before we start, just tell more about yourself, experience, background, and why you pay so much attention to podcast format. We have many different other formats, videos, text-based, social media. So why podcast?
Yeah, why podcast? Good question. Well, I didn't really set out to be a podcaster or to even use podcasting as my medium of choice. I kind of fell into it almost. Anatolii, I have a background in video content, so I owned a video agency and sold it, and then started
Mm-hmm.
Motion. And Motion, which is the company that I own now, started as a video content agency designed for predominantly working with tech companies. So we did a lot of those animated explainer videos you often see, product videos. We would film on-site events, etc. And what we found was there's this issue with video projects in that they're very like a one-time project essentially, and you kind of put all this effort into one 2 to 3 minute video, and that's it. You just show up and you produce this thing, you spend a couple months on it, and it either works or it doesn't, or, there's no process there to refine anything or to build a consistent content strategy from it. And that's where we started to create shows for customers where they wanted more of a consistent content stream, a way to learn from their audience, a way to communicate with their audience consistently over time. So we started to develop shows, and then ultimately about 3 years ago, we completely pivoted from being solely a video agency to now building shows for small, scrappy marketing teams at tech companies.
Mm-hmm. Nice, great. It's interesting. Once I spoke with a client and told him, we need to create a podcast. And he replied to me, why I need to do it? My competitors don't have podcasts. Probably this channel doesn't work. And my reply was like, it's a good opportunity. If your competitors ignore this format, then you can become first. You can get this niche. Can you tell how to start from scratch? For example, if companies have the goal to cover new format like podcast, and what to do first, second, third, all steps.
Yeah. Well, even before we talk about like where to start from scratch, let me ask you a question. Like, what in your mind, what do you think a podcast is when I ask that question, if you had to describe it?
For me, at first, I love creating content, and podcasts. Probably, I can't tell it's my loving format, but one of the of loving formats because I love reading books more. But I love this format because I can walk with my dogs, I can drive, I can train, many things to do and keep learning, because I can't do something else at that time. But if I listen to valuable episodes, I can learn. So that's why I create this format. That's why I have it. For me, it's important to love what you do. For example, if you create content for the sake of getting sales, traffic, it doesn't work because you can burn out fast. But if you love the process, if you enjoy the process, then you can go ahead. And podcast is the format that I enjoy.
Yeah.
And the second, I love building relationships with marketers. In podcast, it's simple. I can invite Neil Patel, Ren Fishkin, Tristan Pelligrino, many others, because I know we can help each other in the end. You can share my content, I can share your content. It's like today it's hard to go ahead without building relationships. That's why I love this format, and it helps to grow business as well. My audience loves this format. They love to listen valuable episodes, and yeah, my 3 points why I do it.
Yeah, so I love it. So, and that's an interesting answer. And I think you have a good mindset, right? Because basically the podcast that you're describing is more than an audio channel. And so when you're asking me about like where do you start with a podcast, I think the first thing is to really understand what a podcast can be today. It's more than this audio file that you put out on Buzzsprout or Anchor or whatever podcasting hosting platform that you select. A podcast is really about relationships, like you just talked about. I mean, that's one of your the top 3 things that you selected there, and it really unlocks a lot of other content. So if you take a podcast traditionally, it's been this MP3 file, but if you take a step back, you build out a video podcast that can really serve as a foundation for all these other different types of content that you can create. Gives you an opportunity to build something consistently and experiment with different formats over time. So I think the first thing to do when you do start out exploring whether a podcast is right for you, it's really just changing that mindset that a podcast can be more than an audio channel. And once you know that, Anatoly, I think that the first 2 things that you really need to lock down before you start out on this adventure of creating a podcast for your company is you need to very clearly understand who your audience is that you want to connect with, and then how you're going to help them. And I think
Mhm.
those 2 big questions need to be answered because that is where you'll start to get into all the other details downstream. So that, in my opinion, is where you start.
Mhm. Okay, let's talk about the target audience. Can you tell how to learn from scratch? Because I don't know my audience, and for example, once I found that my audience is different on YouTube, is different on LinkedIn, is different on my website. No, people are different, or probably even people are the same but have different mindset. So if they open website, they need SEO services. If they open YouTube channel, they want to get educational content. And I tried to set up the same buying persona on different channels and failed because I got it of this different mindset. I need to consider them. So can you tell for podcasts, for example, I have audience on some channels. Let's name Twitter, LinkedIn, it doesn't matter. I have it. But on podcast, probably I'll have different mindset or different audience. So how to find and learn audience from scratch?
Yeah, well, I think when you're defining your audience, it's more about like understanding, one to one, individually, like who are these folks that you're looking to connect with. And I think you're talking more about the how it will help. Like if you're on YouTube, I think the content from your podcast might be more how to, more informational, kind of take that direction. So maybe you take pieces of your episodes that fit that format better. Now, when you're releasing a traditional podcast episode in audio format, conversations are a great type of content to release in that format. You probably wouldn't necessarily use a visual medium as much in an audio format of the podcast. So I think that is more of the format and trying to figure out like how they're consuming it. But what I'm trying to encourage folks to do is think about who it is specifically that you want to connect with. Like, is this a marketer at a tech company that has a team that's less than 5 people? If you think about those circumstances, there are a lot of different challenges that they have looking through that lens. And so if you start there, then you start to figure out, okay, how can I help them with this podcast? How can I book guests and get other industry experts to maybe help them solve some of their problems? How can I bring on someone internally from my company that has specific expertise in an area that can solve their problem? How can I talk about my product on the podcast in a way that allows them to solve a problem that they have, not in a salesy way, not talking about features and functions, but talking about how to solve a problem. And then, oh, maybe by the way, my product does that. So there are a lot of different ways that you can help your audience. But I think when you're working with those two things, that's really the foundation of a quality podcast from a company standpoint.
Nice, nice, valuable. When I listen to you, you remind me the quote that the era of lazy marketers is dead. If you just get the average data from tools, you will fail because you need to spend time, by learning your audience. Okay, let's talk about finding content ideas. It's another struggle that I see when people don't know what to share, or they probably have like a few topics, that's it. But for podcasts, it's important to be consistent, to bring value as much as possible, to help others, to educate, or probably entertain. So any insights how to find great ideas that will help the target audience?
Yeah, so finding inspiration for episode topics is a question that we get a lot, because initially that customers want to do a podcast, they want to help their audience, but they're like, okay, how do I actually generate ideas for each episode? How do I structure those? And I think the easy answer is the inspiration for podcast episodes could come from all different angles. And
Mhm.
as a marketer, you really get an opportunity with a podcast, which is unique to any other medium, get an opportunity to work with all types of areas in your company. So let's think about this a second, Anatoly. If I have a branded podcast, I can start out with very simply some of the top questions that my customers have on discovery calls. Like, let's start
Mhm.
very, very specific right there. And if you think about that, you're kind of helping the sales enablement side of your company. So let's take those top questions that customers always have when we get on the phone, and let's answer those in some creative ways in a podcast format. Maybe I bring on someone internally that is
Mhm.
a sales rep. Maybe I try to understand how they're answering this question. Maybe I bring an industry expert on and try to
Mhm.
understand how they overcome this challenge. So there's a lot of different ways that you can tackle that. And I think when you do create a podcast for your company, one of the best ways to start is really these small stories. These like very specific questions that you can answer, because you can really use those on the sales enablement side right away. And that's really the best place to start, is just answering questions for your customers. And then from there, you can expand on these ideas. And once you get some of that momentum going, consistency, like you're talking about, you start to generate new ideas. You might hear a different take or a different experience with something once you interact with your audience, and then you can explore that in a lot of different ways. So I think it's always about trying to get some of that early momentum, trying to figure out, where do we start the show? Where do some of these initial ideas come from? And then once you get this flywheel going, that's where you start to pull in a lot of other ideas, and kind of things spark from all different angles.
Nice, nice. Yeah, valuable. Love it, love it. Okay, Tristan, let's talk about bounce rate. It's interesting that according to many studies, it doesn't matter what kind of format you have, people bounce fast. On YouTube channels, 80% of people bounce for 20 seconds. On website content, we have the same metrics like 50, 90%. And in podcasts as well, yeah, it's the same, because people are willing to get valuable insights or interesting content fast. So they're not interested to get some fluff, big, I don't know, big intro without value. Can you tell how to retain audience longer, how to retain listeners to listen the entire episode?
I think the biggest way to keep someone interested in your show or your particular episode is to deliver on the promise. So let's say you have a podcast episode title or you have something in the intro. You are really the entire episode are trying to fulfill on that first thing that you set out to do. And that's why, a lot of people talk about it as a hook or some kind of cold open, something that draws interest or that early connection with your audience is kind of that gateway to their attention. But then the entire time, the entire episode, you're just always connecting back to that beginning piece.
Mhm.
You might it might be entertaining your audience. There might be something that was funny or unique up front that got their attention, and then you're trying to fill in the gaps from there. Or there might be something specifically that there was a question that they had, and then what you're doing is really answering that question in the best way that you know how for the rest of the episode. So I think it's really just fulfilling on that promise that you set out to do with every single podcast episode.
Mhm. Mhm. Once I made keyword research on podcasts and I found most keywords are related to Joe Rogan. He's popular, famous.
Yeah.
And if you type podcast on Ahrefs, Google Keyword Planner, or at any tool, you can see many keywords with Joe Rogan. And I found people often copy him or any other influencers, but it's hard to be the second Joe Rogan or the second Gary Vee or the second. It doesn't matter, what kind of influencer you like. It's better to be yourself. For example, I can't copy these guys, but I can be myself. I tried many different formats. For example, I prepared a list of questions and I found it doesn't work for my audience because they like live conversation that we have right now. When I create questions after getting your replies, so I can ask new questions without preparation. So can you tell how to be yourself? Because, for example, I can copy some comedian stuff because they spend time to improve their humor. It's like any other skills. And once I read the book from Damon John. He one of producers in Shark Tank, and he shares on his book about a girl. This girl was an introvert. She didn't have any friends. And once she decided to post content on Tumblr about herself, 1 million people started to follow her. 1 million people are the same, So she didn't copy others. She just showed the way how she can be herself. Can you tell how it's important to differentiate yourself from others? How it's important to not to copy others, but be yourself?
Yeah, when it comes to differentiation, perhaps as a podcast host or creating differentiation with your show in general, I think the first thing is to understand that you as a person or a podcast host, you are unique just as yourself. So, in a lot of advice that you see out there is to really try to improve your weaknesses. But when it comes to maybe creating content, maybe flip it the other way. Why don't you focus on the strengths that you have as a content
Mhm.
creator or
Yeah.
as a person, as a marketer? And why don't you double down on what you're really strong at? And that's probably the direction that I would recommend. You can always improve some of your weaknesses, but when you're starting out and you're trying to get that momentum and you're trying to find your voice, why don't you double down on what you're really good at? I mean, take an example for me. I'm not the type of person that loves standing in front of 1,000 people in an auditorium, right? I just have no desire to be a keynote speaker or anything. And I very much love the one on one conversation. And that's really why I love an interview based style podcast. I love the art of conversation. I love the art of creating interview questions to maybe get different answers or encourage the guests that come on the show to think in a different way. That's what I enjoy the most. And that's really the direction that I've gone in. Now, as I've been a podcaster for a number of years, and mean, I've probably hosted 400 or 500 episodes. I try different things. I try to maybe find a new little technique, or, I'm constantly working as a podcaster. But initially, I really tried to focus on what I was strong at, which is, just that art of that one-to-one conversation, and really establishing that relationship with someone on the other end versus like this mass keynote speech or something along those lines.
Yeah, love it, love it. Yeah, yeah. It's better to consider your strong side. You remind me Bill Gates, and he told, for example, if he has product A and product B, after investing X amount of money to product A and X amount to product B, if product B will sell 2 times more, then the next time he will invest everything. I mean, like 2x marketing budget to product B because he can sell a lot more. So it's like if you have your strong side, you need to consider your strong side and go ahead with that. I have the question about call to action. Today, podcast, it's a big industry. I don't remember exactly the number, but a few $1 billion are in marketing on podcasts. Companies are willing to pay to become sponsorship, to market their products. Can you tell how to add call to action to the podcast format? Because, yeah, we have two goals. The first goal, for example, when company podcast for the sake of selling their products or creating brand awareness. The second, when you have the goal to market others. So can you tell about adding call to action to sell products? It doesn't matter. Your products, others, just how to do it.
Yeah, so from an advertising standpoint, when we're thinking about a call to action in a podcast, the best way I like to think about it is to just be very clear as to what that call to action is, and make just one call to action. Make it a very simple website, make it a very simple phone number if that's the case. I mean, for the most part, and we do integrate ads into some of our customer shows, and then we also have ads in some of the shows that we produce at Motion. And what we do with each of those is to just have a very simple URL, a very clear next step for your audience
Mhm.
that you want them to take. Because if you're encouraging people to follow you, on Spotify, then Apple, then you want people to go to your YouTube channel, then you want people to check you out on LinkedIn. Oh, by the way, you know, hit me up on Twitter. It's like they don't need, people are consuming a podcast, like you said at the top of this. You're running, you're walking your dog, you're in the car. I mean, how are you going to write all this stuff down? And are you really going to
Yeah.
go to the show notes to see all those different call to actions? No. So try to make it simple, make it very direct, and clearly state what they're going to get out of that call to action. And that typically is the best way that we try to take that from a CTA standpoint with podcasts.
Nice, nice. Can you tell how to grow podcast? How to get new listeners, a loyal audience? Any tips how to grow? For example, if someone has podcast from scratch or what has or with the goal to grow, any insights about that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, and Anatoly, I have a blog post that I'll send you after this, but I just wrote one. Yeah, it's like 13 ways to market your podcast, because I think,
Oh,
the
nice.
one thing that folks struggle with is they're trying to really focus on the downloads, right? So it's like, how can I get more downloads? But if you take a step back, and let me find the chat here. If
Mhm.
you take a step back and you're thinking, all right, how can I grow this entire show beyond just downloads? And let's think about how we can use this content. And then once you're going back to how am I going to help this audience? So let me just go through a couple things here of different ways that you can grow a show. And this is I'm talking about this from the lens of a branded podcast. So your company's podcast, right? So the first thing that you can do is focus on the collaborations that the folks that you bring on as guests. That is one way right there that you can grow your show, is just by capitalizing on other audiences. So Anatoly, right now I'm on your show, and I would love to take the content that we're creating here and use it in a lot of different ways. That is going to help you get visibility into a new audience, I'm assuming. So that's just one piece of it there. It's trying to create those, co-marketing opportunities that you have just through the natural conversations that you're creating through a podcast. So that's one thing. Another is using podcasts within your email marketing strategy. So a lot of folks, they have a list that they have of customers, they have a list of prospects, and maybe they're using this in outreach, right, to a colder audience. You can use your show as a way to spark a conversation. So like here's a segment in this podcast episode that I think would be relevant to you, or I think this would help you with something that we talked about a couple months ago during our discovery call. So it's trying to figure out how to use different pieces of your episodes within marketing, email marketing, that you're already doing. Another thing is using or thinking about some of the other events that you have going on with your company, right? So are you going to a trade show? Are you going to an industry event? Or are you speaking? All of these situations are opportunities for you to either find new guests for your podcast or even record on site. So a lot of our customers are doing live recordings on site at trade shows or events. They're building relationships there. They're creating content while they're on site, and then they're taking it back and finding a way to use that material in other ways. So that's something that the folks, they tend to just think a podcast is just this one type of content that I'm creating, but then they fail to recognize that it could be folded into a lot of the other things that you're already doing on the event side and in real life. Some other things here, naturally SEO is a big piece. I mean, we talked about that a little bit. Podcast SEO, I like to equate to maybe how Google was like 10, 12 years ago. I mean, if you have very clear titles and you optimize your descriptions, you're very clear with your show name and the summary that is attached to your show name. All those things can really contribute to helping find your podcast episodes on sites like Listen Notes or in the podcast apps. So that's one thing. Just low hanging fruit is to answer those questions and maybe use a keyword strategy in some places. And another piece is just paid promotion. I mean, let's face it, if you want to grow a show and you're confident that you're helping your audience, then put a paid strategy behind it. Whether that's driving people to a website landing page that you have for your show that houses all the episodes, or if you're just trying to take snippets of the conversations that you have on your podcast and get those in front of an audience to try to build some awareness there and to introduce your company as a way to help them overcome their challenges. Those are all different things that you can do on the marketing side to grow your show.
Nice, nice. Yeah, great tips. And let's touch more about paid marketing. For example, I love this channel. For me, paid marketing sells a lot more and better than organic reach. I grew my Ukrainian YouTube channel with paid marketing. We grew like when we got 10,000 subscribers, we stopped. And after that, we got a lot more subscribers with organic reach by creating valuable content. And can you tell about using paid marketing for podcasts? Do we need to use Google ads, Facebook ads, or we can use inside platforms like on Apple, Spotify, or Google Podcasts? Any tips how to use the right way paid marketing?
Yeah, there's a couple routes you can go. So on the paid side, you can create ads, and this is something that we do for our customers. If you're targeting like downloads or listens
Mhm.
specifically through the podcast, you can do sponsored content where you can create ads that are actually pulling up different podcast episodes within some of the sites that you would recognize, right? Like major publishers. That these ads are embedded within the content. It's sponsored content, that typical type of ad that you see, but they're formatted in a way for consumption right on the site versus going out to a podcast app. So that's one form of advertising there. The other is getting very specific with the audience that you're looking to connect with. One channel that's very common for a lot of our customers is LinkedIn, because you can get very targeted with the audience on the other side. You can target by, company size, job title, the exact company actually that you want to target. All these different parameters help you take some of the very specific messages or content that you have in your podcast episodes and then tailor that to that audience in LinkedIn. And then what you can do as another layer is you can figure out, so who's consuming this, who interacted with it, and then perhaps they clicked out or they viewed a video, and then you can retarget from there, maybe with another video that's a little deeper or a little longer, or it takes a different take on that, specific topic that was discussed in that ad. So it's just trying to build layers from a paid standpoint, try to see what works, and then add some things on top of that.
Nice, nice. Love it, love it. Awesome. Okay, I have the question about common mistakes. Can you list common mistakes that podcasters still do and how to find a much better way?
Yeah, the biggest mistake that I see in a lot of companies come to us after they've been spinning wheels for a while. They focus on a lot of the things that I don't feel are important to your show. I've seen customers come to us after 4 months of trying to finalize their cover art. And I'm like, "Okay, so the cover art's not done, but let's take a step back. So who is the show for and how does it help?" And they can't answer those two questions. So it's like, start with the very foundation of what you're trying to accomplish, answering those two very important questions, and then you build from there. And I think the other mistake is, in addition to just taking so much time on things that don't really matter, is, folks are they're spinning their wheels a lot on these early episodes and trying to create these complex episode structures and formats. And to your point, they want to be so different that that episode one takes 3 to 4 months to produce. And it's like, I don't even know if it's going to work yet.
Yeah.
And so let's strike a balance, which I think is hard because you want it to be good enough to release to your customers. You want it to help, and you don't want to release garbage content out there by any stretch. But then you also don't want to spend 3 to 4 months on something to release episode one, to have your cover art defined, and then once you release it, gets 3 downloads, and then the CEO's breathing down your neck saying, "Hey, we got to shut this thing off. You guys have been working on it for 6 months. It doesn't make any sense." So I think it's just about striking that balance, which is a little different for every company. You have to try to figure out exactly what that comfort level is, and what they're comfortable distributing and getting in front of the audience. But once you get there, that's where you build that momentum, and you just have to constantly improve from there.
Nice. Yeah, you remind me a study. If I remember exactly, it's like on the store. We often see desk when promoters can give for free some food. And they put 6 types of cheese, and or the next time they put 24 types of cheese. And when customers have a lot of choices, 6 times more with cheese, they buy less in the end because they don't know what to buy. It's hard to them to choose. So simplicity is key on content. It doesn't matter what kind of content you create. You don't need to crush your customers' minds.
Yeah.
And I love website Apple. Very simple.
Yeah.
When I open apple.com, I see only iPhone, nothing else. I don't see MacBooks, AirPods. I can find them if I go to in the website structure, but on the first visible screen, only iPhone, because Apple knows that iPhone is responsible for plus 40% of all sales. They list best-selling product in the homepage. Yeah, love it. Awesome. Tristan, I have the question about your experience. Let's imagine you started from scratch without any experience, knowledge, skills. What will you do today to learn more about podcasts?
Yeah, and that's a great question. It's like, where do you start if you don't have any experience? The best way, I think, is to maybe start a podcast without actually launching one. Like, maybe
Mhm.
build some of those skills that are required to be a good podcaster. So, I mean, for years I was behind the camera. I did a lot of documentary style content. So I interviewed, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people before I ever even did a podcast episode. And I'm still working on interviewing techniques and crafting questions, and it's just a lot of fun for me. But I think if you're going to start, or you have a goal of starting a show, start working on some of those things to build some of those skills, and figure out, maybe what you want to focus on initially. So maybe do an internal interview series at your company, interview your CEO, and without the pressure of distributing that podcast episode. Just do it strictly an internal interview, and just say you're going to use that information either for social posts or perhaps to create a blog post. But practice. Think about how you're going to
Yeah.
structure that conversation. Think about what you're trying to get out of the conversation. And all of those skills can be a foundation for starting a show later on.
Yeah, love it. I couldn't agree more with that because for me, practice is more important than overlearning. You can learn a lot. I can read 100 books how to play soccer, but if I don't hit the ball 1,000 times, I'm not sure that I can become a good soccer player. So it's the same with podcast. You can't learn how to do it. You need to do it, just do it. And then
Yeah.
you can learn from mistakes. You can make mistakes. That's okay. It's part of the process. And I made a lot of mistakes. It doesn't matter what kind of content I
What
create.
what has been your what was your like biggest mistake that you think when you started out podcasting?
I think I try to pay so much attention to create high quality podcast without experience. And once I got a good tip, if you wanna become a great YouTuber, we can relate to podcast as well. You need to film 100 bad videos. So if you film
Yeah.
100 bad videos, you can get confidence, you can get experience, then you can pay attention to create high quality content. But it's hard to do it from scratch if you have no experience. And yeah, one study shares that most podcasters don't record the second episode. I think most podcasters don't record even first episode.
Yeah.
So yeah, but if you have experience, practice, then you can pay more attention to create high quality content. Without experience, just do it. Just create for the sake of having it because of getting experience. That's normal. You can't compete with Joe Rogan, in the first episode. Even after 100 episodes, 1,000 episodes, it's hard because of his
Right.
experience. But you can be yourself and go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tristan, I have the final question about the future. Can you predict the future? What kind of future will be in podcast industry? Because many things are coming, metaverse, I don't know, AI, augmented reality. What do you think? Is it good idea to start podcast today? Probably future will change everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think the future of podcasting is such an interesting thing. And in many ways, I don't think podcasting is going to change that much, surprisingly. I mean, if we think about what a podcast was 15 years ago, which one of the first podcasts I created was about that long ago. The fundamental foundation of a podcast episode is a conversation in a lot of cases. So in many ways, that's not going to change. What I am excited about, I mean, you mentioned AI. There's obviously a lot of conversations around AI and how that will take shape. I think it will definitely have an impact on the podcasting industry, whether that's how you summarize conversations, how you select different quotes, how you're able to combine information from different episodes. I think all that will be very interesting to see how that shakes out. Another thing too that I think AI will help with is once you get a lot of episodes and you get like this content library, it's trying to figure out, all right, if I'm writing a blog post, Anatoly, if I want to do a blog post on, let's say, podcast marketing, and I know I've had 8 episodes around podcast
Yeah.
marketing, and I'm looking for some really good quotes. I'm looking to piece together this story. It's really incredibly difficult to go and find that information unless you're searching through transcripts or whatever. But you don't have that contextual information. You don't really have, unless someone specifically said a key word in a transcript, it's very difficult to find that. So I think AI will help us discover information within our own content, which I think is a big piece of repurposing and distributing content and creating mashups of content you've already recorded. That's what I'm really looking forward to there.
Yeah, nice, nice. Yeah, I think that was simple to ignore AI yesterday, hard today, impossible tomorrow. We need
Yes, I agree.
to use this format because I see social media posts about AI, and many people think that this format can replace humans. I think lazy people, it's possible to replace, but someone who adapt to this technology, someone who uses, I think, for me, I think many writers will be controllers and managers of AI in the future. It's my prediction. Because it's like, farmers, when they got a tractor, so they didn't lose their jobs. They just adapted how to use tractor to produce more food. So AI is a tractor today. You need to use this tractor to produce more results in your content format on marketing channel. Tristan, it's a big pleasure to get in my show, to learn from you. A big pleasure. Love all your valuable insights. Thanks, guy, a lot for listening and watching us.
Thanks for listening to Recorded Content, a show brought to you by Motion, a done-for-you podcasting agency for B2B tech marketers. We do the podcast stuff so you can focus on strategy, building brand awareness, and developing new relationships. To learn more about how you can launch and grow a podcast for your company, check out motionagency.io. Thanks for listening to Recorded Content.